Got my green screen back. Hell yeah. This was originally going to be a very different video. Initially, I wanted to do a fairly comprehensive review of Fallout 4. But honestly, I just lost steam writing that script. And I didn't feel good about it. And honestly, there's more than enough fine videos doing that already. So instead, I'll give you a few pieces of criticism and then move on to the real meat of this video, the factions. Criticism. The main piece of criticism I have to give, which I think most reviewers noticed but never really articulated properly, is that the world building in Fallout 4 is very strange. It's not that the main storyline is so strange because the writing is bad per se. It's more that the game just never bothers to explain anything. Super mutants live like across the street from raiders, and apparently they're just chill. I thought super mutants wanted to end all human life, but apparently the raiders are cool. There are so many raiders in the ruins of Boston. Now, while having raiders in a game is fine, too many is just weird from a world building perspective. For one, who do they raid? There are like very few caravans that travel the Commonwealth, much less that travel the ruins of Boston. And if there were traders to be raided, there's no way this number of raiders could be maintained by anything short of several, and I mean many, major cities along the lines of not something dinky like Diamond City, but like of Vegas or Vault City. And this is made even more odd by the rare occurrence of scavengers who act exactly like raiders, except presumably they scavenge rather than raid, which makes so much more sense. I don't know why several of the raider bases weren't just switched with that of scavengers. That would have fixed everything. Another thing I don't understand is why so many raiders never formed like settlements. Like raiders are just people who raid. Eventually they tend to settle down and form communities like they did in England. I mean, those were Vikings, not raiders, but you get my point. You would think eventually some raiders would stop open firing at every power armor clad behemoth they saw wandering the Commonwealth. Wandering? No, wandering. You would think eventually some raiders would stop open firing at power armor wielding Commonwealthers and be like, hey, trading's pretty cool. But no, they never do that. I guess raiders in this universe just don't have self-preservation instincts. Well done, Bethesda. Bethesda. Fallout 4 suffers mainly from a lack of coherence. I actually think there's a lot of good in this game. The gameplay is solid, the factions are at least conceptually interesting, customization is cool, settlement building is fun for some. The established settlements are pretty dang cool, but despite all the good in this game, it's unable to synthesize it into a meaningful experience. This can be clearly seen in how all the factions are really whack when interacting with the player or each other. The Minutemen seem to have no real opinion on the Brotherhood or Railroad. Like, I know they blow up the Brotherhood, but like, it doesn't make a lot of sense. The Railroad will still recruit you if you disagree with them on every principle imaginable. The Institute and the Brotherhood just really suck at properly explaining what their plans for Boston are. Plans for Boston, whichever one of those is correct. Overall, Fallout 4 suffers from an inability to justify its gameplay and fails to meaningfully intertwine the world into something thematically and narratively satisfying, which is a shame because the individual parts of their world are super cool. I'm not gonna lie, the random encounters you find in this game and just wandering the Commonwealth feels a lot more like Fallout 1 and 2 than New Vegas or 3 ever achieved. Right, so I'm going to go into the factions of this video now. Basically, this is my recommendation what to do with all the factions after the game. There's a lot of videos on like how to fix so-and-so faction, what Bethesda got wrong with so-and-so faction, a few simple fixes that Bethesda could have used to make so-and-so faction better. But those are all inherently kind of useless. Like, they're fun to do, you know, it's creative. I like whenever people, you know, get their writing brains out and do stuff creative. That's fine. I like these videos. But they're all kind of useless. Because Bethesda's not going to go back and rewrite these factions in retrospect. Like, they're not going to remake Fallout 4, right? But what they can do is they can take these factions with ambiguous endings and put them in other games and rehabilitate them that way. So this is kind of my suggestion for that. Not how to rewrite these factions into something more meaningful if I had control over Fallout 4, but how they can still be useful to Bethesda, show up in other games, and be really satisfying narratively, except the Institute. I will be presenting my ideas in a way akin to the post-game slides in Fallout 3 in New Vegas. And yeah, I'll see you out of character at the end of this. Peace!
After the triumph of the Brotherhood of Steel and the purging of the Railroad's leadership in the Old North Church, many believe the Railroad disbanded for good. Although rumors abounded that agents such as Deacon and Dr. Carrington made it out alive, if barely, nothing was ever confirmed as the Brotherhood maintained the Railroad threat had been destroyed. As the leadership disappeared, former Railroad agents and freed synths not yet secure in a new life began to make preparations to move south. As the refugees of the Railroad snuck through Brotherhood territory, making contact with their agents in the Capital Waste as they went, they would see their numbers swell. Stray synths and ghouls fleeing Brotherhood oppression, and even some settlers from larger settlements, would greatly increase their numbers as the Brotherhood's occupation grew more and more invasive. Even a former Institute scientist calling himself Virgil would follow them as he pleaded for one thing: to fight the Brotherhood. Soon radicalized and exiled Minutemen seeking revenge on the Brotherhood, ex-Institute cursors with no organization and nothing to lose, and even some super mutants, brutal and violent, although not as dim-witted as any in the Commonwealth or the Institute believed, would all come to the Railroad as a final hope to rally around. The former Railroad agents quickly split over the path forward. Some wanted to journey on and make contact with the followers of the Apocalypse, while others felt they needed to stay and fight the new scourge of the Capital Waste and the Commonwealth. In time, mysterious broadcast would be cast into the Capital Waste and the Commonwealth. Although the Brotherhood would take little notice of the small bands which individually fled their occupation every now and then, a message would make its way to the people of the East Coast wastes. Woe to you, the huddled masses yearning to breathe free, to all whose home chokes beneath a steel boot. We lift our lamp beside the golden door, to the tired and the poor, to all those who ail, come and follow the Freedom Trail. Rise into prominence in 2180, the Commonwealth Minutemen would be seen as a major force in regional politics before their decline in 2240. Over the next nearly 5 decades, the Minutemen would slowly shrink as splinter groups broke off to seek a more lucrative life as a raider, while others died in the line of duty. By the time the Brotherhood of Steel crushed the Institute, the Minutemen had evolved into a group of only 5 in a remote neighborhood in the north part of the Commonwealth. Eventually, a kind-hearted Brotherhood sentinel would come to their aid and help rebuild some of their lost influence. However, everything changed as they retook the castle. Situated so close to the Brotherhood's Pridwin and boasting several articles of artillery, the Brotherhood of Steel began to grow suspicious. As the Brotherhood Sentinel split off from the group due to ideological differences with one Preston Garvey, the Minutemen were left unprotected against the suspicion of the Brotherhood. In an attempt to reconcile, the Brotherhood would offer the Minutemen a place in their civilian administration and would allow them to keep their arms in exchange for turning over the castle and convincing all their settlements to accept Brotherhood protection. Hoping the Brotherhood would eventually evacuate the Commonwealth after the defeat of the Institute, Ronnie Shaw, the castle's commanding officer, at the behest of Preston Garvey, who had been raised to the position of general by popular demand, would refuse their request in a stern but non-combative communication. Unfortunately, this response was unacceptable. The Brotherhood would soon descend upon the castle and destroy any semblance of life the Minutemen had built back up, with the Brotherhood of Steel sweeping across the Commonwealth, forcefully disarming any Minutemen they found. Preston Garvey, for the second time in his life, found his beloved Minutemen quickly deteriorating. In a moment of desperation, he ordered the Minutemen out of the Commonwealth and to head west to regroup and plan their next step. A small but vocal group objected and quickly gave counter orders to march south in an attempt to make contact with the remnants of the railroad rumored to be operating somewhere south of the capital waste. Preston, for the second time in his life, could not stop his men from splintering even more. In the years that followed, two very different types of Minutemen would march out of the Commonwealth. Those who followed the Freedom Trail would turn to hatred. They would organize themselves as a hardliner militia, hell-bent upon destroying the Brotherhood, their earlier goals of protection rotting away. Those that remained with Garvey would march west towards an unknown destination. Some say they abandoned the ruins of America altogether and headed north to Canada. Some reports had them settling in what was once known as upstate New York, trying to carve out a life just out of reach of the Brotherhood. And even others tell of the Minutemen traveling as far as Chicago. But one thing is for certain, Preston Garvey was a man broken as he marched out of the Commonwealth. Whether he would lead the Minutemen to their idealistic end goal, or if he would fall into deep despair, leaving the Minutemen aimless and angry, or if he would transform the Minutemen into a group who met the harshness of the waste with equal ferocity, only time will tell. I just knew too much. The wasteland of what was once known as America is riddled with people who yearn for the old world. However, almost no faction would be able to truly achieve the trajectory of the old world as much as the Institute would. However, even here the folly of humanity would bring about their destruction. The Institute's head, known as Father to those he guided, in search of a worthy successor and family, would release his remaining parent from their vault in the hopes that they would find him. This desperation, whether it be for a loving family or a competent successor, would lead the Brotherhood right into the Institute's heart. When the bomb in the heart of the Institute went off, there was no warning, no alarms, no escape. And yet, some lived. Just as humanity survived the Great War, the Institute would survive their own apocalypse, if they were not hunted down. Left without protectors, the Brotherhood would gun down any synth they would find, Institute or not. Sometimes confirmation of a person as a synth would only be done after the fact. As for the scientists and agents who managed to escape, if the wasteland or wastelanders seeking revenge didn't kill them first, they would be given a choice: work for the Brotherhood or face the fate of their creations. In time, the few Institute scientists that survived the assault on the CIT would be absorbed into the Brotherhood and go on to become a crucial linchpin in the Brotherhood's development and acquisition of technology. The Brotherhood of Steel, guided by Elder Maxon, was a far departure from what it was under Elders Owen and Sarah Lyons. Where they were gentle and kind to the capital waste, Maxon would be stern, protective, and authoritative. His reconciliation with the outcast Brotherhood would instill upon the young elder that dissent and unknown or unpredictable forces were dangerous and not to be tolerated. When he arrived in force to the Commonwealth, he would carry these lessons with him. After the destruction of the Institute, he did not retreat to the capital waste as many expected, or as many had hoped. Instead, the Brotherhood would remain in the Commonwealth under Maxon's orders. He would not leave the Commonwealth chaotic and ungoverned as his mentors had in the capital waste. Instead, he would stay and occupy the Commonwealth until stability was returned and the mutants and raiders were purged. When Maxon's newly appointed Sentinel began helping the crippled Minutemen, he did not approve but was content to see what they would become. As the Sentinel moved on and the Minutemen began to build up strength so close to the Bridwin and then refused to operate with Brotherhood personnel, tensions eventually came to a head, culminating in the destruction of the castle's garrison and disarming of all the Minutemen who remained in the Commonwealth. With the ousting of the Minutemen, Maxon would order a full-scale military invasion, which would see the Brotherhood Knights taking over and occupying settlements like Bunker Hill, Diamond City, Sanctuary, which had grown significantly while the Minutemen still operated, and most difficultly, Good Neighbor. Elder Maxon would then hand over control over civilized sections of the Commonwealth to a less martial civilian government underneath the scribes. However, in areas like Good Neighbor, the Slog, civilian administration would never come. In the time following the sole survivor's mission in the Commonwealth, the Brotherhood would enforce its own rule upon it. The citizens would live lives perhaps safer than most in the Waste, but their civil liberties and access to advanced or sometimes even basic technologies were stunted by Brotherhood administration. As time passed on and the threats presented by the Commonwealth fell away, Maxon's eye began to wander. But where his might and his ambition lies next is a question only time will answer.
Well, that sure was fun. Yeah, so that's what I think should happen, but let me take you through my thought process a little bit. Really, Cat? Really? Also, you can't see the bottom of them because I've cut my feet out of frame on account of me wearing sandals with no socks, as I do through nearly all of these videos. The railroad in its state as of Fallout 4 does not really work. It's too homogenous and small in ideals to really function as a major faction, which is weird because they're hyped throughout the game as the only ones really fighting the Institute. It would make more sense if they were a broader organization with more secretive and smaller head staff who planned and coordinated a lot of anti-Institute groups around the Commonwealth. In my ending, the railroad would operate more similarly to this. There would be a government, for lack of a better word, in exile, maybe somewhere in the Carolinas or Appalachia, depending on the lore for those areas. I don't know how to pronounce this. I've been told I do it wrong. But I'm a West Coast snob, so frick you. This government would be essentially tasked with coordinating all anti-Brotherhood operations in the territory ruled by the Capital Brotherhood. The main conflict would be between the more traditional ex-railroad agents who want to focus upon building up their strength outside of the Commonwealth and Capital Waste and hope to build basically a new society outside of Brotherhood control while still maintaining contacts within Brotherhood controlled territory, and an opposition group composed of a cabal of mostly ex-Minutemen and ex-Cursors with maybe some super mutants thrown in there. This radical faction would function as they all agree upon one thing, and that's advocating for a more active fight against the Brotherhood. This faction would essentially promote terrorist attack and guerrilla warfare against the Brotherhood forces. They would be a far more morally gray part of the faction, but they would also be a far more effective and realistic wing of the Railroad Exiles. Also, I just like the idea of ex-Cursors joining with former Railroad members out of just pure hatred for the Brotherhood and super mutants. I think it's a really cool idea. The Minutemen are complicated. Overall, they are a very one-dimensional group, which does not have much of an opinion on most issues, other than being just generic good guys. This makes any storyline focusing on them after the events of Fallout 4 really problematic, since they can basically sit out the entirety of the story in the majority of playthroughs without any real interaction with outside groups. They don't have a lot of places to go. So when I was playing through and crafting this video, I knew that I didn't want the Minutemen to stay in the Commonwealth. I knew they would have to leave. Because besides a full Minutemen ending, I can't really think of a good story based around them. I do not really think they have much of a place in the story of Fallout beyond Fallout 4 in anything besides a full Minutemen ending. They're very clear cut and there's not a lot of ambiguity, especially when they don't appear in most people's playthroughs. The reason they would be kicked out of the Commonwealth is another issue. Since they are so neutral, the overall feeling of most factions' endings towards them is that of apathy. So realistically, the Brotherhood seems the most likely to actually kick them out. The Institute probably would as well, but I don't fully understand what the Institute's plan is, so I really can't say one way or another, but I can totally see them coming into conflict with the Brotherhood. Like, very directly. Like, the Pridwin is literally across the street from the castle, which is, armed to the teeth with freaking artillery. This is an issue. This is a big issue. With their laser muskets and rather interventionist stance, I could also see them very naturally coming into conflict with the siblingship of theft. Honestly, I'm not even really happy with this. It does feel very contrived. It's just that the Minutemen really don't integrate well with any non-Minutemen playthrough. I also chose to have the Minutemen split up simply because I can't see a very local force being very chill about just piecing out of their home. I think there would be plenty that would recognize local resistance would be fairly futile and suicidal. I don't even know what just happened behind me. But I do think that there would be plenty that recognize local resistance would be fairly futile and pretty much suicidal. But I would also imagine they don't really want to give up. As for where Garvey and his men end up, personally, I would say Canada. But I think if they settled in Western New York, they would just kind of vibe. This would be the least interesting option, but perhaps that's the most fitting. If they continued on westward, I could see them ending up in Illinois and perhaps coming to conflict with what remains of the Enclave in Chicago. But honestly, I just prefer to see them in Canada. The Brotherhood of Steel is, in my opinion, the best faction in all of Fallout 4. I don't mean like morally or that they're the best option for the Commonwealth. I think they're just fun and the most well written. Initially, it appears that the Brotherhood is really just here to kill the Railroad and Institute, but in the post-game, it's very clear they're gonna stay. But they don't, like, do much. Like, in my first playthrough, I brought Raiders into the Commonwealth through Nuka World, and the Brotherhood just didn't care. I literally brought slavery back to the Commonwealth single-handedly, and the Brotherhood was just like, they don't stop raiders, and they send supply runs into Diamond City, which flies Brotherhood flags for some reason. Also, side note, this flag sucks. Like, they had a perfectly serviceable one in Fallout 3. This is the same Brotherhood. Why did they change their flag to something so ugly? Orange isn't even a Brotherhood color. Where did that come from? That's the Outcast color. They were orange and black. That was the Outcasts. And now the Brotherhood is the Outcast? Why wasn't Maxon in the Outcast? Are the Outcasts supposed to be the new head honchos? I don't understand. Why did this change? Am I reading way too much into it? Yes, totally. This is clearly supposed to be the same Brotherhood. But why would they change the flag? But there's no, like, shift of power other than the flag's changing. Like, the mayor's still in charge, and once he dies, there's still no government. But overall, they don't do much besides occasional raids on super mutant bases. I think this is supposed to imply a prepping for military occupation, but there's a lack of hard evidence for this. In my ending, I would have the Brotherhood established a military occupation over the land in order to protect the people. It's plain and simple, something I think should have happened in Fallout 4, and I think that was what was meant to happen, but just kinda didn't. Like, I'm fairly sure that was the plan, but they just did it poorly. I also think it would be cool to see Maxon establish a civilian administration through the Scribe. I think we should show the Scribes to be a little less paternalistic and more maybe meritocratic or like democratic, as they are academics as opposed to marshals. Of course, they're still going to be fairly paternalistic, you know, being part of a military order. I think they would run a civilian government better than the Knights, and I think Maxon is smart enough to realize that. This more authoritarian, paternalistic administration, which was run by the Knights, would maintain occupation over places like the Slog and Good Neighbor, which I can't imagine are going to be particularly happy about new xenophobic authoritarian dictatorships. If Bethesda wanted to go in a darker turn than they have been going, I would even suggest that with the Brotherhood's rather concerning histories with ghouls, they might well set up a colony of sorts where they send non-feral ghouls, which probably boast less than stellar conditions and is probably very paranoid about ghouls going feral. Maybe they would even reuse the Slog as this settlement. Who knows? Segregation. I'm talking about segregation. They would segregate ghouls because they're racist, okay? The Brotherhood is racist. Only happy thoughts over here on the Adventure Karma channel. I think Bethesda has a really interesting chance to make a counterpart to the NCR on the East Coast. This would take the form of a paternalistic, authoritarian, and fanatic government organized by Maxon's East Coast Brotherhood. And I think it could be really cool if made correctly. It's also a great chance to criticize people who believe that their authority comes solely from the ability to keep people safe, no matter how unhappy or unfree their people are. I really hope Bethesda does something like this, because I think it could be just as good as, like, the Legion, but different enough to justify a game based around a land under the State of Steel. The Institute is boring. Generic bad guy scientists have been done better in Mystery Science Theater. And that's a shame, because I think the Institute is actually a really interesting idea that was kind of just squandered. Realistically, I guess they may be able to do something if they had the Sole Survivor side with the Institute. It would put the Minutemen and Railroad in a very similar position to that of a Brotherhood victory, but I don't think that's as cool or as interesting. I think the best way to rehabilitate the Institute is by just taking characters from the Institute and relocating them. Characters are fine, the institution is just kind of bad. The faction is bad, but the characters are fine, and they can be reused. That's all I got for you. Stay gaming, babies, and I will see you next time, where I'll probably upload a YouTube video.